Coming up, deep underground is an area that's baffling geologists.
The Earth's core could, in theory, cool down and stop spinning.
We peer into the planet's multiple layers to determine just how much these subterranean sectors affect life on the surface.
If everything stopped moving, we wouldn't have a habitable planet.
Hotels and inns feel the burn in a touristic Italian city as a major water source dries up, and June 2024 was the 13th consecutive month of global record-breaking temperatures. What wealthy nations are doing to avoid helping countries that cannot afford heat and weather-related disasters.
It's so devastating to know that we don't get a chance to take out nothing at all.
We've been challenging them over and over again, saying what we're setting up here is a fund. It is not a bank. It is not a business. There is not a profit-seeking endeavor here.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now,
I'm curious about what your argument was. I mean, did you give it to them on behalf of all of us?
intense heat waves in North and Central America, the Middle East, Asia, Africa have killed a number of people since the start of the year. Now, we don't have an official death toll just yet, but dozens have died in Thailand, scores in India and Mexico, and more than 1,300 over the course of a few days in Saudi Arabia during the Hajj pilgrimage. It is no surprise that June was the 13th straight month of record-breaking heat and the hottest June we've ever experienced. Temperatures over the past year were also what they were, in part because of El Niño. But even with that weather phenomenon having ended in April, scientists still predict that 2024 will be the hottest year on record. We'll take a look at Mexico, where temperatures were over 50 degrees Celsius in early July. Air-conditioned tents were put up for the homeless, people working outdoors, and pedestrians just looking to cool off for a few minutes. Officials and volunteers also distributed oral rehydration salt packets to avoid heat strokes. And these kids used this agricultural irrigation canal to their advantage. It was as hot as 40 degrees on one day in Japan in the first week of July, but for the most part, temperatures remained in the high 30s. The local weather agency was forced to issue an alert against heat exhaustion for much of the country, advising people to stay indoors and in an air-conditioned environment during the day. And one of the hottest places on the planet also experienced a heat wave. Sounds weird, right? Well, California's Death Valley National Park is actually a pretty busy tourist spot, with adventurers liking the novelty of it, even though this July officials issued advisories of the dangers about being in this desolate region. Well, scientists and environmentalists aren't surprised by the heat levels. According to the International Energy Agency, global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions in 2023 grew by 1.1%, increasing, that's 410 million tons, to reach a record high of 37.4 billion tons. Emissions from coal accounted for more than 65% of the increase last year. What's worse is that the drought-driven global shortfall in hydropower generation drove up emissions by around 170,000 million tons. The IEA says emissions from the global electricity sector would have fallen had it not been for low rainfall. Meanwhile, we've been following the progress of the Loss and Damage Fund, which is meant to be a lifeline for countries that struggle to recover economically after climate disasters. The most recent meetings about this instrument were held in South Korea. I called up Brandon Wu, ActionAid's Director of Policy and Campaigns, to get the scoop.
Brandon, I know you've been following these global heat waves, which is partly why you and ActionAid have been championing the Loss and Damage Fund. So our friend Harjit Singh tweeted that you challenged the, quote, US framing of the business model for the fund. I'm curious about what your argument was. I mean, did you give it to them on behalf of all of us?
Well, first of all, it's not just the United States. It's many of the board members of this new fund are talking about the business model of the fund. And we have been saying over and over again since the establishment of this new fund, which is meant to support vulnerable communities in developing countries to recover from climate impacts. So like the heat waves that we're seeing around the world now, or extreme weather events, things like that. We've been challenging them over and over again, saying, what we're setting up here is a fund. It is not a bank. It is not a business. There is not a profit-seeking endeavor here. All that we're trying to do here is move money from the rich countries of the world to vulnerable communities who really need those resources to cope with climate change. And so the whole idea that we have a business model kind of it sends the wrong signal, right? It has the wrong implications. It sort of implies that what we're trying to set up here is a bank where maybe we want to make some loans and get paid back, and that's really not the spirit of what we want to be establishing here.
I know one of the US's arguments and other countries like the US is that some countries, while they may not be classified as developed, but which are economically strong, should contribute to the fund. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree with the motivation behind that political position. This is a decades-long strategy that's been led by the United States, really to avoid their responsibility to pay for climate damages. They've, for over 20 years now, the United States has pointed at China, saying, if China's not on the same level as we are in terms of obligations to pay or in terms of obligations to cut emissions, then we're not going to do anything. And that is a deeply, deeply immoral position. And so while I agree that there are many wealthier countries in the world that may not be considered traditional, sort of historically industrialized, developed Western countries, many of those countries do have some capacity to make contributions into a fund like this. It is the obligation of those traditionally developed countries to make contributions. And other countries actually are stepping up and making some small voluntary contributions. Korea actually at this board meeting made a small pledge. The United Arab Emirates at the last board meeting made a small pledge. Those are voluntary contributions. We love to see those. It doesn't change the fact that the legal and moral obligation really rests with countries like the United States or the European countries or Japan, those historically industrialized countries that have really, been the primary driver of the climate crisis in the first place.
I know that $7 million pledge by the South Korean government was announced by the Deputy Finance Minister Choi Ji-young, who also said that we expect that this contribution will serve as a catalyst for encouraging parties to contribute more voluntarily. Has it?
Well, it just happened, so no, not yet. I would love for it to catalyze more voluntary contributions from countries that are able to do that. What I would really love even more is for it to shame countries like the United States, who have pledged just paltry amounts of money, not only to this fund, but also to other multilateral climate funds, who literally owe billions of dollars, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, and have failed to follow through on that obligation, as I said, for decades now. And if having countries like Korea, having countries like the UAE or others that are making these voluntary pledges, actually put some shame into the developed countries that have been failing to meet their obligations for years now, that would be the best outcome possible.
We're already seeing very costly storms, considering that the Atlantic hurricane season, Pacific monsoons have both begun. Where do we stand now in terms of the implementation of this loss and damage fund? How soon will it be able to help people?
So the earliest it can possibly start distributing money based on the sort of work plan of the board, which is working to establish the policies of the fund and so on, would be early 2025. So unfortunately, we do have a bit longer to wait. And we could have had this fund 10 years ago.
Why is it taking so long?
Well, so the board has to create all of the policies around how the money is going to be distributed once the money is received, which it hasn't been yet, right? How it's going to be allocated between countries, right? Because this is a fund for all developing countries in the world. How the money is going to be allocated, how it will be distributed. Will it be through national governments? Could it somehow go directly to communities, which is something that we're advocating for? What are the environmental and social safeguards around how the money is going to be used? And then you've got all the really kind of boring administrative stuff, like we have to hire some staff for the fund. What are the human resources policies? Very basic things like that. We have to hire an executive director for this fund. And so all of this stuff, unfortunately, takes time. Again, like I said, this is something that should have been done at least 10 years ago. Developing countries were making the demand for a fund like this, again, 10 years ago. And the developed countries, really led by the United States, said, no, we don't need that. That's what we have humanitarian assistance for. And until just a couple years ago, they stonewalled the creation of this fund. And so that's why we're in the position we're at now, where we have climate disasters that are increasing in intensity around the world, and we don't have a really good centralized way of providing countries the resources they need to cope.
2025. So the World Bank is meant to host this fund. Can you clarify the type of access that vulnerable countries will have to the money, and whether it will be in the form of grants and not loans?
This is contested, right? So this is one of the reasons that I'm here at the board meeting, is advocating for the money to be available in grants. And we know that the World Bank is not primarily a grant-making institution. The World Bank is a bank. It likes to make loans. That's what it is best at. And what we want is a fund that provides an alternative so that countries that are hit by disasters don't have to take out emergency loans from institutions like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, and then go further into debt. We want this fund to be a source of immediate grant-based resourcing in the event of disasters. And unfortunately, we have a bit of an uphill battle to fight because, as you said, the fund is going to be housed at the World Bank. That is a fight that we lost last year. I will say that...
Whose decision was it to have it hosted at the World Bank, which is, as you said, a primarily money-making organization?
That was really strongly pushed by the developed countries, again, in particular, the United States. And, we think largely because the World Bank also is an institution that's largely controlled by those same developed countries. It is not a democratic institution. It has basically the more you pay into the World Bank, the more voting power you have, which means the U.S. has the largest share of voting power.
So the loss and damage fund will be a money-making venture for the World Bank?
So this is where it's actually a little bit tricky. The Loss and Damage Fund staff will be hosted at the World Bank, but it is an independent fund. So the board, which creates the policies for the fund, is independent of the bank. The board is trying to negotiate a variety of conditions with the bank, saying we want this fund to look a little bit different from other funds that are hosted at the bank. And so that's where we have a little bit of leverage to say we want to make sure the World Bank meets these conditions so that this fund can distribute money to all developing countries in the world, not just World Bank member countries, so that it can use primarily grants, so that countries can directly access money from this fund rather than having to go through multilateral development banks as intermediaries. These are all things that are in negotiation. So we felt that it was unfortunate that the fund ended up being housed at the bank, but there's still places where we can push and have this be not a money-making institution, actually, and have it be a fund and not a bank. So again, that's why I'm here at this board meeting, and we'll be continuing to follow this process.
I really appreciate your work, Brandon. Of course, the work of ActionAid. Thank you so much for the update. Hopefully, we'll catch up with you another time for another update. I believe the follow-up meeting will be in the Philippines.
The Philippines was selected as the host country of the board, which probably means they'll host a future meeting. But the next meeting will actually be in Baku, in Azerbaijan.
Okay, got it. Brandon, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Drought conditions have been creeping across Italy, have been for years really. The populous city Sicily, for one, has experienced months of below average rainfall leading to this. Lake Pergusam appears to be drying up. The body of water is part of a nature reserve and has shrunk dramatically because of hot weather and low rains. Pergusam has no tributaries flowing in or out of it. It's fed by groundwater and rain. Normally, the lake covers around 1.8 square kilometers, but this looks nowhere near that. What's also urgent about the situation is the biodiversity that rely on the lake's survival.
Il lago Pergusa intanto è l'unico lago naturale che abbiamo in Sicilia, che ci rimane in Sicilia, ed è una importantissima stazione per quanto riguarda l'avifauna migratrice nella rotta centrale paleartica, cioè nella rotta che fa passare le specie migratorie dall'Africa all'Europa e viceversa. Importantissima soprattutto nel passaggio dall'Africa verso l'Europa, sarebbe la prima stazione di sosta per diverse specie, stiamo parlando veramente di centinaia di specie diverse per migliaia di esemplari l'anno, che ovviamente in queste condizioni non trovano assolutamente ristoro.
Let's go underground for this next report onto the Earth's core, which is an immense region roughly 2/3 the size of the moon, located more than 5,000 kilometers beneath our feet. But scientists believe that earthquakes, volcanoes, and continental driftwood are all influenced by the planet's core. Yet this enormous geological layer is still shrouded in mystery.
The deepest part of the Earth, the core, is a geological layer that exists in a superionic state, not quite solid nor liquid. Composed mainly of metal-rich compounds such as iron and nickel, it's believed to consist of a solid inner core surrounded by a liquid outer core. This region, situated more than 5,000 kilometers beneath Earth's surface, boasts temperatures as high as 5,400 degrees Celsius, akin to the surface of the sun. Direct observation or sampling is currently impossible, fueling mystery and fantasy around this geophysical phenomenon, which has inspired Hollywood blockbusters like the 2003 sci-fi film The Core.
That's an electrical superstorm.
How could this have happened?
It was Project Destiny. We killed the planet.
So, how do we fix it?
We can't. The core is the size of Mars. You're talking about jump-starting a planet.
What if we could?
But what do scientists know about this immense force that spins at the center of the Earth? Well, the core lies beneath the Earth's crust and mantle. Scientists theorize that the Earth's magnetic field tugs at the inner core, causing it to spin and affect the outer core. The movement of iron and nickel in the outer core generates electrical currents. This interplay influences the motion within the outer core, believed to contribute significantly to Earth's magnetic field, a crucial shield that protects us and all life from deadly solar winds and cosmic radiation. But what implications would a slower spinning core have for the planet?
The core of the Earth has stopped spinning. The spinning core protects us from cosmic radiation.
Without it, radiation will create superstorms. Microwaves will literally cook our planet.
Well, this report isn't brought to you by Hollywood, but experts and researchers who not only confirm the core's slowdown, but argue its deceleration is part of a decades-long cycle of fluctuations in speed. Adding to the complexity, scientists at NASA discovered in the last 200 years, Earth's magnetic shield has lost 9% of its strength. They speculate that over billions of years, cooling in the Earth's inner core could lead to its complete solidification, potentially destabilizing the planet and exposing life on Earth to harmful solar particles.
So many unanswered questions right about the center of the planet. Well, I spoke with Chris Elders for answers. He's an emeritus professor at the School of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Curtin University.
Before I get a bit into what all of this means for the environment, if it means anything at all, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if the core, if everything relating to the Earth stopped moving completely?
Yes. So if everything stopped moving, we wouldn't have a habitable planet that we could live on. So the consequence of the core stopping moving would be that the magnetic field would disappear, and then we would experience much more cosmic radiation. So the magnetic field deflects the cosmic rays from the sun. That's the main effect of the core slowing down or stopping moving, or these variations in the magnetic field that we know about. Also, if the Earth cooled down completely, well, we would end up being something like Moon or Mars, just a very barren planet with very thin atmosphere, nothing to support life, really.
How long do you think before we have the capability to actually explore the center of the planet?
Well, we can explore it to a certain extent already by using information from earthquakes. So the way earthquake waves travel from one side of the globe to the other and pass through or don't pass through the core. And we can use a technique called tomography. So much like a medical scan, you're using that energy to sort of try and create images of the mantle, perhaps less so of the core. But we know there's places where sort of hotter material rises from from sort of within the mantle, perhaps from the edge of the core. So sort of it's the way we can study it is by an indirect monitoring technique, I say much like a medical scan, rather than ever being able to drill a well deep enough to sample material. I say, 4 or 5 kilometers, thousands of kilometers depth and temperatures in excess of 5,000 degrees centigrade. We'd need something pretty special to be able to get there, I think.
So you don't think us replicating this movie, The Core, ever during human existence?
Unfortunately not. Like many movies, it's a great story, but it won't necessarily happen.
What is considered normal when it comes to the movements down there?
Okay, so we know that the core consists of 2 parts. There's a solid inner part and a liquid outer part. We know that it's moving because the movement of the core, which is mainly made up of iron and nickel, produces the Earth's magnetic field. And we know the temperature is somewhere around about 4,000, 5,000 degrees Celsius. The source of the heat is from when the Earth first formed, 4.5 billion years ago. There's also radioactive elements that produce heat, but generally speaking, over time, the whole of the Earth is cooling down. But that's a process, as I say, that's been operating over billions of years and will continue for billions of years more.
Do we know why the core spins at all?
Well, it's to do with the fact that the Earth is rotating. There is the friction between the outer layers of the Earth, so the Earth's crust and the Earth's mantle, and the core, and then the mantle is sort of semi-solid state, and the friction between that semi-solid mantle and the liquid core produces the movement within the core. But beyond that, because obviously it's several thousand kilometers below the surface of the Earth, it's very difficult to say anything more directly about it than that.
So correct me if I'm wrong, the inner core, which is made up of metal, is suspended in this liquid, which is the outer core. So why would the inner core slow down, then speed up again?
Okay, so that is very difficult to say. So, and it's not something, again, that we can easily observe directly. What we can observe is the magnetic field that results from that movement. And we know that the magnetic field fluctuates over geological time periods. And that is, over the past 3,000 years, the magnetic field has been gradually declining in intensity. And there's different parts on the Earth's surface where the magnetic field is stronger and weaker, and those places move around. So really, I think you can think of that liquid outer layer of a body of liquid that's convecting and moving around, but it does so in a little bit of an irregular way, much like the atmosphere. It's not constantly moving all in the same way. So just according to how the friction forces are operating and how the heat's being dissipated at different times different places will experience different currents, I guess, within that liquid outer core.
Is it at all possible for the Earth mantle, outer, inner core to stop spinning completely?
No, that's not likely at all. So it's the Earth won't stop spinning because that's controlled by gravitational forces. So that's sort of separate and external.
And that's our show. Let's go back to South Korea, where Brandon was situated for the Loss and Damage Fund meetings. The parts of the country were battered by monsoon rains while he was there, the likes of which are seen once every 200 years. But at the time of this recording, at least 4 people were confirmed to have been killed as a result of flooding and landslides.